They told me I had a knack for seeing the map beneath the noise, the quiet architecture of a school. Which child needed a margin of mercy? Which meeting could be shortened? Which parents simply needed to feel heard? They gave me spreadsheets like puzzle boxes and told me to open them. They gave me a title I never wanted but learned to be proud of: leader of an instructional team. Then somebody rewired the room without asking me, and the lights went out on the parts of me that people relied on the most. If you want a thriller that fits inside fluorescent bulbs and laminate floors, it starts where most of them do, with ordinary people in good clothes, doing hard small things. The scene I keep returning to is banal and precise. A hallway outside the gym where the PA system stuttered. My students lined up in their clutches of jackets, and a person I assumed would help, a friend of the building named Tenny, who misheard me too, or perhaps decided she would not slow down for me. And the whole line of children drifted 5 minutes late into an assembly that mattered. That late start, of course, became a seed. I taught at a decently affluent high school where the parents curated opinions and the administration balanced optics and budgets. Teaching was not glamorous, but it fed me. The tiny incandescent moments when a student's eyes lit on a problem and something clicked. I could spend an afternoon coaxing a reluctant reader and feel like a magician. My specialty, the thing the previous principal liked to say at faculty meetings, was my quiet obsession with data. I loved the way a ledger could be coaxed into telling a pupil's story: the attendance, the marginal grade shifts, subtle gains in competency. I built Google Sheets that did more than add numbers. They predicted trouble spots, pointed out opportunities, and made parent conferences less guesswork and more conversation. I do not tell you this to look boastful. I tell you it because the story that changed my school hinged on that particular skill. The job of leader I accepted was less about authority and more about stewardship, organizing meetings, collating student growth reports, nudging teachers toward methods that actually help kids pass state thresholds. I spent off hours massaging formulas and creating conditional formatting that glowed like warning lights when a student drifted toward failure. It was delicate, slow work, and it kept children from being lost. I also live with sensory processing quirks and a mild hearing loss. I don't mention that on casual days. It's personal, a private thinness that sometimes folds me in half like paper. But in meetings, in crowded halls, in the noisy immediacy of a packed cafeteria, a sentence can evaporate and be replaced by something else in my ears. I'll pick up Stacy, might reach me as, "I'm gone, just wait and see." It's a real thing. I learned to cope. I asked for follow-up emails. I left meeting notes typed and tidy, and I developed the ritual of tapping my ear gently to indicate I hadn't caught something. Most colleagues understood. Most were willing to pause. Then the principal I'd worked with left for a job in a neighboring district, and the school hired a new administrator, competent, tidy, and not predisposed to listening for anything outside of what a grown-up meeting demanded. That new principal, Marlowe, had an energy like a clean sheet of paper, decisions made on first read, a penchant for quick solutions. She liked tidy logic. She liked commitments that could be documented in memos. She also liked to hear ideas that sounded brave when she repeated them at board meetings. The trouble began in the fine print between the spoken words and the written memo. Marlowe began advocating a strategy which, if stated plainly, smelled faintly of expedience. Focus our scarce resources on students who were on the bubble, those just shy of passing state tests, rather than distributing help equally. The rationale was seductive. A small pivot would improve performance statistics quickly, making the school look more effective to the district and to the grant panels that paid for resources. The strategy's ethics were, at best, porous. If you concentrate attention on those who could be nudged across the pass line, you can improve aggregate scores at the cost of those who most needed consistent support. I asked, as I always do, for the plans in writing. I asked for the policy to be vetted by the district's compliance team before any rollout. I asked for clear documentation because my doubt was not theoretical, it was professional. When the explanations were given only in passing, "We'll do a pilot," nothing formal, I asked Marlowe to repeat herself in each meeting and later to send an email confirming the decisions. I'd tap my ear and say, "Could you send that in writing?" More times than felt breezy. At first she was polite. After a while, the politeness hardened. Tenny arrived like spring. She'd been with the school for years, adored in the community for coaching, parent chummy, the kind of teacher who ran concession stands for every home game and knew the names of the parents' dogs. She was popular because she had warmth and good timing. She could make people laugh, and she'd been handed a pulpit of affection the way other people have hobbies. I liked Tenny on paper. I liked her at the staff barbecue where she carved the roast with a smile. But the nuance of working together is a particular thing, and not every pleasant person is an effective collaborator. She found my hearing difficult to manage. Hallway speech for her was an accelerating cadence, and she expected a fast step. When she talked to me, she often would not pause long enough for me to ask for a repeat. She would shout over the crowd and walk on, or she would leave me a verbal instruction and disappear into the stream of the building. I asked directly, in private, for a small accommodation, an email when the location of an assembly changed, a quick text instead of a shout. She rolled her eyes the first few times. Those were small defeats I shrugged off. I am not the sort to demand spectacle for small slights. Then there were the gaffes. An assembly relocation I didn't catch because the PA system garbled the room number. A parent meeting where a change of schedule was announced and my mind, unmoored by ambient noise, heard half of it. A crowded faculty meeting where someone threw out a procedural change and I asked afterwards, "Could you send that in writing?" And the person answered with impatience. She and others started to fold those moments into a story that did not fit me, that I was inconsistent, forgetful, borderline disrespectful. It was not an argument. It was a slow accretion. People saw a pattern, a teacher who tapped their ear and then missed a corridor instruction. People do not always ask about the why. Rumors prefer simple arcs. The day Marlo asked me into her office, I knew the tone in her voice before she said the word. "We need someone who can represent the team," she told me. "Someone who communicates clearly. Someone who will not create unnecessary friction." The phrases were armor, meanly neutral. She spoke of respect and consistency as if they were boxes I had failed to check. She would not identify the complainants, privacy, she said, but she did say that a colleague had brought concerns forward. When I asked who and why I had missed any of this, Marlo shrugged as if bureaucracy itself had handed down the judgment. Sometimes your gestures come across as dismissive. A few staff members find it difficult to interact with you in the hallway. Her eyes were not unkind. They were practical. There was nothing theatrical about it. That made it worse. "We're going to make a change," she said. "We need a leader who will be able to collaborate without the recurring interruptions." A week later, an all-staff email went out. Tenny, beloved coach and veteran, would step into the leader position. The inbox was a chorus. Reply all stacked floral praise atop one another. Congratulatory emojis rained in the thread. I learned the technicality of a school's politics in that email. Momentum can be manufactured by kindness and reinforced by clicks. A rumor becomes a mandate when no one writes the correction. I felt hollowed out and strangely furious. The feeling was small and animal. A coil of heat behind the sternum that wanted me to spit out a list of my hours, my interventions, the nights of parent conferences that had kept me at school well past the office lights click. But when you have been part of a community you love, you do not want to pick a fight that will injure children. So I swallowed it. I packed my spreadsheets and my pride and went back to the classroom. Reprieve came in the small, quiet acts. I redesigned a lab to help a shy student catch up. I rewrote a parent letter until it felt humane, and I kept grooming my sheets for the day I might return to leadership. There is a dignity in steady work, but the story that would follow was not a clean arc of wrong and right. It was messy and human. Tenny walked into the office with the title and with the warmth of the crowd. The next school year began, and I sat in the wings watching what she would do. I will confess something before I continue. For a while, watching her flounder felt like a private catharsis. It is a small, shameful pleasure to see a rival confronted by the complexity of what you once bore. But if your heart is human, that satisfaction is a brittle thing. It cracks loud and leaves you knowing you have not been generous in pain. I felt that crack soon enough. Tenny's first week was a slow courtyard of surprises for her. What people cheer for from the bleachers is not the same as what keeps a school operational. She learned quickly that a leadership role at a public school is not a pageant. The spreadsheets I'd obsessively constructed, the ones she had watched me click through in passing, were not trivial. They had rollover formulas that pulled enrollment updates from central rosters and reconciled with homeroom splits, with conditional flags for attendance, special education designations, and a half-dozen hidden columns that corrected for changes in semester dates. A missing lookup would throw off a parent notification system. A mistyped index in an array formula could scramble a bus list. Whoever led that position needed patience, a taste for detail, and the willingness to do the quiet, repetitive labor that saves hours later. I watched her try and fail and tried not to feel gleeful. She called me within the first week because one of my complex sheets returned a ref, and the letter of panic on the line was raw. "How did you keep up with this?" she asked, breath tight. I explained the structure slowly, like a repair manual. She thanked me and then, in a tone that sounded like an apology and an accusation folded into one, said, "I had no idea it was so involved." The words sounded small in my ear, but the world in that sentence was big. She had believed the surface brightness of the role and not the scaffolding. Parents are the gravitational center of all school stories. Most of them are saints in disguise, anxious, proud, and frequently generous. A tiny percentage are like weather systems, sweeping through your days with storms. The first of Tenny's tests came in the form of a parent, let's call her Mrs. Hargreaves, who had a long history with the school and an inclination toward sustained confrontation. Her son, a kid named Jordan, had been flagged last year by our data as likely to struggle. I had nudged interventions, a targeted reading group, weekly parent emails, a monitored check-in in homeroom. When Tenny took over, she inherited the case file. What I did not expect was how those targeted interventions translate into time. In my head, I could do the phone diplomacy required with a 12-minute call. I knew exactly how to listen for the grievance and reframe it into a plan. Tenny, in the early days, took 45 minutes on the first parent call, then another half hour following up because she hadn't kept precise notes. Her empathy was real but imprecise, which means she gave much but gained little. The paperwork that should have accompanied an intervention, documentation that protects teachers and helps the student in bureaucratic terms, was thin. Without it, Jordan's small fall through the cracks became visible. The first formal complaint landed in the principal's inbox like a weather alert. Mrs. Hargreaves, blunt and articulate, enumerated a string of missed commitments and promise forms that had not been filled. She demanded a corrective plan. The district compliance officer was polite when he requested documentation. Tenny did not have it. I had the messy spreadsheets and a history of correspondence. I could have kept offering a private, precise hand, I suppose, but the temptation to watch was a human thing and I entertained it for a few days. She made it worse. She took on the case herself, juggled it with a dozen other requests, and found herself sitting in endless calls with parents whose grievances turned circular. Then the state came calling, not literally, but the tone changed when a regional advisor asked for our school-wide data strategy. Our earlier informal approach to the bubble strategy, the one Marlowe had mused about at the edge of legality, suddenly had teeth. The regional office wanted to see written policies. The district wanted assurances we were following equitable practice. Tenny, who had been moved into the position under the invitation of cheer and goodwill, faced a bureaucratic machine that demanded evidence, precedent, and the steady hand of someone who had anticipated the churn. Her struggle crystallized, painfully, in a faculty meeting where she presented her plan. On the projector were slides that, admittedly, tried to follow the logic Marlowe favored: quick wins, targeted interventions. But her slides were inconsistent. Some figures pasted from last year's mock-ups, some formulas that had been typed manually by a panicked hand. A parent's comment from the back row, not the worst kind, but a pointed question about fairness, landed like a bell. For the first time, I saw her shoulders slump, the public eminence wobbling. She was not a villain. She was a person in over her head. The room felt colder than it had the week before. The damage was not theatrical. It was incremental. Misfiled documentation meant a student support plan failed to transfer to the summer program. A misrouted email meant a parent did not receive a notification and showed up angry at a Saturday event. The district began nudging Marlowe for corrective procedures, and the chorus of staff who had not asked for the detail of leadership before came forward now, not to scold, but to shepherd the school through the friction. In those moments, the community that once applauded Tenny's appointment discovered what real leadership requires. Not bluster, but blueprint. I will not pretend I stayed purely sympathetic. I had my frisson of private satisfaction when she fumbled a spreadsheet or when a parent's interrogation flustered her. There are dark pleasures to seeing someone who once looked down at you trip over a shoelace. But satisfaction does not build you. It erodes you. Watching someone struggle also forces you to look into your motives. The endgame arrived in stages. The district asked for a written corrective plan. Marlowe, who had been pragmatic rather than cruel, called me into her office. "We need solutions," she said, not unkindly. I thought Tenny could carry it. I was wrong. The forthrightness of the statement was a kind of relief. It meant the school's priorities were to the students, not to the social currency of a faculty brunch. "I'll write the corrective plan," I told her. The words escaped me like a breath. They surprised me because I had been rehearsing a different play, one where I sat back and let the evidence speak for itself while Tenny found her way. Instead, I felt the gravity of the work. Students were the unit of consequence. Ego was a distraction. "I'll do it, and I'll include the documentation trail," I added. Marlowe did not offer me the role back. That was not the point. She offered the work to fix a problem. I could have demanded the job as recompense. I could have bargained for a title. And briefly, as human as I am, I considered a small, restrained list of demands. But I did not. There is a feeling in educational work that prestige is unmoored to virtue, that sometimes the fairest hand is the one that simply steadies the ship. I wanted the ship steady. I sat in a dim office that night and looked at my sheets. They were, in truth, a palimpsest of small kindnesses and years of patient labor. I rewired formulas for clarity, added audit columns that would show, at a glance, whether a support had been logged, and created template messages that a teacher could send to a parent in 5 minutes that would look like solid policy. I annotated every step with a comment, who had done what and when. I wrote scripts for parent callers that would help move a circular grievance into a practical list of outcomes. At dawn, I delivered a clean binder to Marlowe, and an even cleaner shared drive folder with live versions of the sheets. The district consultant called within a day and said it was tight and defensible. "This will hold up," she said. I felt the small relief of someone whose work had been tested and found strong. What I did not do was make Tenny a villain. I sat with her across the round table one afternoon after the district left. She had weathered the winter of public censure poorly, a reddening of her eyes, a hand that shook at the rim of a coffee cup. She apologized in fits at first, and then with a steadier voice. "I didn't know," she said. "I thought being liked was the same as being prepared. I thought faith could be a substitute for work." I told her the truth, that being liked is not a crime, but liking alone does not shield you from the labor of leadership. She listened like a student, and then, in the same way she would coach someone to take just one step at a time on the court, she asked me to teach her. Not as a favor, not as a punishment, as a professional request. She agreed to a weekly hour and to log every parent contact. There was a price to the redemption. Tenny offered what she could in contrition: extra help at home games, a public thanks at a staff meeting, and a willingness to be mentored publicly. I suggested, and she accepted, a small stipend for training time, not because I wanted money, but because formalizing the exchange would protect the time and make it real. She sat through lessons on index/match and on how to craft an email that closes a parent call in 15 minutes rather than an hour. She learned to structure a meeting like a surgeon and to ask fewer questions from the hip. The hard part was not the teaching. It was the watching her absorb error and replace it with craft. I won't dress this as a moral victory. I did not gloat in the end. The lesson that burned itself into me, the lasting ember, was not how she stumbled, nor how she later stood, but how fragile a human is under the weight of expectation. Leadership, I learned, is a practice you either train for deliberately or you risk the lives of the children you serve. Months later, when the program we fixed showed signs of recovery, when Jordan's attendance improved, And when a parent complimented the clarity of a follow-up email, I felt the slow rightness of repair. Tenny never became what I had been in the hours I'd given to the role. She became something perhaps rarer, a teacher who had been humbled into competence. The staff conversation softened. There were no more curtain-raising reply-alls. There was, quietly, a greater attention to documentation in the building, and a new district policy about overnight decisions. And me? I learned the weakest and truest fact about joy, that schadenfreude has the same taste as dust. Watching someone found wanting feels sharp and brief and is not worth the long hours you work to help children. I felt ashamed for how much I had wanted to see her stumble, and relieved that my better half had won, in the end, over the lesser pleasure. So I taught her. I rewired the sheets. I added comments in the cells so that the formulas spoke English. I put in an audit column that glowed red if a parent contact wasn't logged within 48 hours. I wrote a single, elegant template for difficult calls. I made the system such that no single person could cradle a child's future in private incompetence. The last time I walked by the gym, I saw Tenny on the court bending to tie a student's shoe. She looked up and caught my eye. She gave a small, honest smile, one that carried no fanfare. In that smile was apology, pride, and the quiet knowledge that she had chosen to do the harder thing. For my part, I felt no triumph then, only a worn gratitude that the work had been done and the children had been protected. Leadership is not a crown. It is a set of small, repetitive obligations. It is the unglamorous bravery of showing up and tracking the minutiae no one else can be bothered to catalog. If I had written a different ending, one where I had been returned to the role and offered the glory, I might have felt vindicated. But what I wanted, when all the lights settled, was not a throne. I wanted a school that worked for the kids. Sometimes the sweetest justice is not watching someone fail, but watching them accept the work of repair, and, in doing so, make a better room for everyone. That, I decided, felt like enough.